we're in.
In Bossier City, strange, oily odors have residents worried for their safety.
And they keep saying they don't know where it is. It could be right there.
Could it be that it's all in their imagination?
Until you start digging, you don't find a lot of things.
Where Lou Gallion's house stands today, there once stood a massive oil refinery.
I am moving, and I don't care what nobody says.
From LPD, this is Louisiana's premier news magazine, with correspondents R.C. Chapa, Jeff Dewey.
People in Bossier City who've been complaining since 1990 that an environmental problem has gone unanswered. Just what is the strange smell in some parts of Bossier that's making people sick? Tonight, Jeff Dewey begins a series of reports on what the town calls the Alexis Park Controversy, beginning this evening with the problem.
Bossier City, Louisiana is a town that's grown with the economic fuel of an air base and oil refineries. Bossier City has today what many Louisiana towns would envy: a stable economy, plenty of jobs in restaurants, stores, and light industry. In the heart of town, people prosper. At the intersection of the new interstate highway and Old Minden Road is an apartment complex called Alexis Park. It's not fancy, but the rent is ideal for young couples. Kids jump the speed bumps on their bicycles in the waning sun of a long summer day. Normal. It all looks normal.
I thought it was just my imagination, but I never felt so tired.
The smell, however, is not normal.
As I walk up sometimes at night after raining or when it's just hot, I start smelling chemicals before I get to my door. It'll come and go, different type of smells. I smell like
Michelle
gas.
Rainey says she smells something
Here's my
strange in her
apartment.
apartment every time it rains.
It's not so bad. It's just, it comes and goes, as I was saying. I know chemicals. I work at Sally's Beauty Supply. I know the difference between fresh air and bad air.
She says it's some kind of oily,
but I never felt so
almost
tired.
chemical odor.
Get up, body aching, and it's not because of cigarettes. I know the difference. Sometimes I cannot smoke, and I'm just achy and exhausted. Just dizziness, and it's
Some kind of odor that makes her worry.
Do you know it's chemicals because you've heard it on the news, or do you know that it's chemicals because it just doesn't?
It
smells
chemicals
like chemicals.
because I live here and it smells like chemicals. Because at first, when all this commotion and the differences between the chemicals, I didn't believe it. But smelling is believing, not seeing is believing, but smelling is believing. And I said, wait a minute, there's something wrong.
Rainey is not the only one who smelled strange, oily odors in the heart of Bossier City. Hotel guests have complained of sickening smells in their rooms. It's been enough to make some Alexis Park renters pack up and look for another place to live.
I'd walk out the door to go to work every morning, and there'd be a strong smell like some kind of oil or something right outside the door. And when it would rain, there'd be a ditch beside the house, and it'd kind of start bubbling with white stuff on top.
It was stagnant. It was very stagnant.
Linda and Terry Strong moved out of Alexis Park, they say, for the sake of their daughter, Ashley.
It got to the point where you could walk to the mailbox and smell it. Nobody would give you information about the tanks. Playgrounds were being closed. The dirt was being pulled up from the playgrounds just to, so nobody would know anything. It was just, it's just gotten very uncomfortable. And with the new baby, we said, it's time to move, I don't know if it's dangerous to the health, but it definitely is not safe for me.
They say they were even more alarmed that the goldfish were dying.
Beside the goldfish dying? Well, the DEQ used to send letters around pretty regularly and updating you on test results and, stuff like that in meetings, when they're going to have meetings. I believe at the playground, they sent a letter around saying that the lead content was higher than acceptable. And so the next day it came down. I mean, it just flat out came down. And so, when that was only 100 feet from our apartment, and then you could smell fumes around our apartment, it's time to go.
In late January of 1990, some of the residents of Alexis Park were forced by the state health department to evacuate in the middle of the night. It was a precaution. Dangerous levels of a combustible gas called methane were detected in several apartments. State officials were concerned there could be an explosion.
Levels of lead and methane gas were high in some sections, but posed no real threat to residents living and
It
working
led the
in
local
area.
TV news for days, and the paper carried stories of how the chemical benzene was found in dangerous quantities inside people's homes. Benzene, even in tiny doses, is known to cause cancer.
Oh, I'm moving. I am moving, and I don't care what nobody say.
And if that wasn't enough to scare residents of this part of Bossier City, neighbors started talking to each other about all the peculiar things that have happened here. For example, this driveway, which has been seeping oil for about 24 years. The residents here say it's worse in the summertime, and they cleaned it up just 2 weeks ago. Already, it's a pool of oil.
We were planting a pecan tree, and my husband started to dig, and as he was digging about 2 feet deep, he hit something with his, I think it was a shovel he had, or a post hole digger, whatever it was, and he hit something, and he couldn't go any further. So he called me out, and I came out and looked, and he kept hitting it, and it sounded real hollow, just like it would be a tank, you know.
Lou Gallion lives on a quiet street in the heart of Bossier City. She says it's unusual, to say the least,
that's all we know,
that a huge industrial tank is buried in her backyard.
So he moved over about 2 feet, and we planted the tree. We didn't hit anything. He planted it, but the tree died about a year later. It did leaf out, but it did die.
This is Lou Gallion's house from above. The photo was taken in 1981. A new house in a new subdivision in the heart of fast-growing Bossier City. And this is her neighborhood in 1967, just 14 years earlier.
Franz,
Where Lou Gallion's house stands today,
where's the kitty cat?
there once stood a massive oil refinery and giant storage tanks. Oil was a mighty force in northwestern Louisiana. In the early part of this century, roughnecks, derrickmen, and land sharks looking to literally strike it rich poured into eastern Texas and western Louisiana. They slept in tents and their cars. They worked for what would become the richest companies in America. It was rough and dangerous. Sometimes, in thunderous explosions, entire derricks would sink into the ground, swallowing the lives of the men on board. The only thing left was a volcanic cauldron of oil and gas. The refineries built in the 1920s to distill the black gold weren't pleasant either. The concepts of occupational health or environmental protection were decades to come. That was Bossier City. And this is the town now. Pizza Huts and Shoney's, neat houses, and Alexis Park. Where there once were pipelines, now there's a shopping mall. Where once there was a sludge pit, the community center. This is a bayou captured on film in the mid-60s. It's on fire. Now people live there.
When you come up on this oil that's coming up out of beside someone's driveway, it's 1 inch thick and 7 inches in diameter. That's not enough to take a sample and go back to Baton Rouge and see, or that's not enough of a concern to do something about. It's okay to wait.
At public meetings like this, residents concerned about what lies beneath their homes have been speaking up.
Shreveport and Bossier are interesting areas because the development of the oil and gas fields in this area, back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, that brought tremendous oil and gas refining capacity here. And this was a big town. Some people, you know, you talk, it's almost like New Jersey. You think, well, all the pollutants are in New Jersey. They're not. When they put I-49 through here, they had to stop at, 70th Street, Kings Highway, Hollywood, and Kings Highway. All of them had buried problems that were turned up as they started construction. from either a spill from a railroad tankers went over a bridge, and I think their contents were still in the ground. A refinery that they went through had contaminated soil. Until you start digging, you don't find a lot of things.
There is almost 7,000 parts per million somewhere, and they keep saying they don't know where it is. It could be right there. It could be anywhere.
Jeanette Tate used to live in Alexis Park. Now she's a crusader for public awareness of the dangers of lead contamination.
And it's hard to get rid of. It causes irreversible damage, brain damage.
Yeah, once it gets in the
Once it gets in,
yeah. That's, you know, that's...
And see, like, the bad thing about the little ones like this is they'll sit in it, and the dust and everything flies, and he can breathe it, and it gets on his little skin, like when it's hot, and he perspires, and it can get into his little body 3 different ways. He can breathe it. People like us that got sick, people like my daughter, who, it's been almost 4 years now. She got really sick, real sick, and she's 26 years old. She was sick off and on for the whole time she was here, and I thought she just needed vitamins or something. But after she got so sick, and I watched her for over 4 hours in the emergency room, I know something terrible happened to her. And because of that, I'm going to make darn sure I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that the state does what they're supposed to do.
All this data was generated since I've been working on the case, since we started this remedial investigation. This isn't any old data. The data in these boxes is generated just from the surface soils, the deep soils, and the groundwater.
At the State Department of Environmental Quality, the documentation on Bossier City contamination is hefty. Charlie Andrews is the site manager for DEQ. He regularly tests hundreds of soil and air samples from the community.
Old Citgo. Here, and here, and here. What was present there was exactly what they made there. You know, you either had crude oil, gasoline, kerosene, diesel fuel. And of course they have sludges, I guess residues left over from the production, like what's left in the crude oil after they've taken all the parts off of it to make all those products. And if, in this particular case, the refinery was old enough to have lead, then you're going to find lead. So, and none of those things are as dangerous as if it was making like chloroform or carbon tetrachloride or any of those chlorinated chemicals. Those are much more dangerous to your own health.
We also know that we're probably going to have to go in and start removing materials from the surface of the groundwater. And we expect we really expect that to have a direct effect on the methane that is coming to the surface.
But how much remediation will be necessary is one of the biggest questions DEQ will have to answer. The original refinery grounds covered more than 215 acres, and the work testing for pollution is hampered by the very nature of Bossier City today. Hundreds of people now own the property that was the Citgo refinery. Each of them may have their own legal agenda. The last and largest owner of the land on which nearly 4,000 people now work and live is Oxy Corporation. What is their responsibility in putting things right? The company is now paying millions of dollars to test for contamination. Residents are still smelling strange odors. Strange, worrisome odors in the heart of Bossier City.
Well, that is the problem. Next week, Jeff will take a look at how Oxy Corporation is conducting that study to find out just what the trouble is. And also, we will ask some questions about why this site is not on the federal Superfund list for cleanup, and also ask why it has taken so long to get answers from DEQ about all of this.
Tonight on Louisiana, the state we're in.
How long can an environmental study take? For Bossier City residents, this one is taking too long. The investigation into strange smells in the heart of town. What's under our city streets might surprise you.
but they left the contaminated material on the site.
Bossier City's crude awakening.
From LPD, this is Louisiana's premier news magazine with correspondents R.C. Chapa, Jeff Dewey, and your host, Robert Collins.
Good evening. On this evening's program, we continue our look at a controversy in Bossier City. Some people there are still complaining that odd odors coming out of the ground and into their homes may be a health hazard. The problem is being studied now, and we'll take a look at why it has taken so long. But first, some of the people there who believe that their health is threatened by oily fumes now are complaining that a study of the cause is taking too long. Jeff Dewey has details.
I tried to plant some tomato plants and pepper plants here and over here, and I even put topsoil, bought bags of topsoil. It just wouldn't bear anything.
Aubin Sanders didn't think twice about planting a small garden under the kitchen window of her townhome. The trouble wasn't too much sun or too much shade. She thinks the trouble is related to the smell.
It never would bear anything.
Inside, strange odors have been rising from the area just under Aubin Sanders' sink.
Well, this is where the worst of it comes, out from under the cabinet here, the pipes up under my sink, coming up out of the ground. We've got it caught.
She says what really worries her is that strange odors in neighbors' houses have turned out to be potential health hazards.
Some of it is like crude oil that's been burned.
The strange stories neighbors tell each other have one thing in common.
The smell is just ridiculous.
A strange, almost chemical smell rising from the ground or from pipes under their sinks that gets worse every time it rains.
You get dizzy. You feel drowsy. Ever since I moved over here, I've been aching.
In 1984, a road crew like this one encountered a pit of buried oil sludge. In 1986, workers digging a new driveway to the Ralph and Kaku's restaurant came across buried chemicals. Again, mostly oil remains. At that time, federal and state agencies identified high levels of lead where the Alexis Park apartments were later built. In 1990, after numerous complaints of gas fumes, more than 40 families were asked to leave their homes in the middle of the night. The playground was closed for fear of children being exposed to high levels of lead in the dirt and puddles.
Here you have an all-electric apartment complex, which, 50 of the units, which is about 20% of the units, were evacuated in 1990 because the fire department is measuring high levels of gas, explosive levels of gas in some of the apartments. And they're saying at 2 o'clock in the morning, you people need to get out of here. But these people apparently have been complaining about gas fumes for months before the evacuation.
Willie Fontenot is the environmental coordinator for the state attorney general. He says it's obvious what's buried under Bossier.
When these plants were operated in the early days of the oil and gas industry, and I would consider that anything before about 1960, there were not a lot of controls or regulations on what you did with your waste, how you operated, how you had to clean up if there were any contaminations. I mean, those kind of rules only came into play in very recent years. It was not safety first. It was, let's get this product out of there and let's process as much as we can, as fast as we can.
The nature of what could be underground contamination also seems apparent from aerial photos of the area. Old pictures like this can be used to find the spots of the most likely and heaviest contamination. They show a refinery, which began operating in the early part of the century. It was the Invincible Oil Company in 1920. Through the years, it became the Arkansas Fuel Oil Company, then Citgo. In the mid-50s, various companies rented the tanks to store oil. By the mid-1960s, Citgo had removed most of the above-ground pipes, tanks, and equipment, then sold the property to developers. All the while, no one, including city leaders, seemed to worry about what they might have left behind underground. Today, the 215-acre refinery site is the center of Bossier. People shop here, and people live here, right on top of a 70-year-old refinery.
But they left the contaminated material on the site.
They used drag lines to, about 3 feet below ground to identify where there was pipes and remove the pipes, and as well as they took all the fluids from the ponds that existed at the time.
Except for the renters who used the facility to store oil, Oxy Corporation is the last owner of the last company to run the refinery. Beji Malik is environmental manager for discontinued operations and has been on the case since contamination was first suspected.
The extent of the cleanup then was really concentrating on clearing and cleaning up the site and not leaving waste material sludges on the site.
Did they go further than they were maybe legally obliged to do?
Yes, well, actually, there were no laws that applied to the site at that time. And I would say that they did more than was practices at the time. In those days, it was normal to leave, to close the ponds on site, let's say, and not remove all the sludges and liquids. And in this case, they did remove all the sludges off-site. So it was done, the practices then, I think, because of knowing this site was going to be developed, they took better care to make sure that everything was disposed off-site rather than on-site.
The town council agreed that was enough. Businessmen were happy to have hundreds of acres to develop in the center of Bossier. But eyewitnesses say it was still a mess, even after the so-called rehabilitation.
What did it look like?
This gooey black, that looked like it was just slick, like a slick layer. Then you walk, and you won't go to sink, and then you walk so far, then you just go to sink, and then you try to make it back, and you get over your knees, and you got here.
James Smith lives on Wilbank Street, a three-way dead-end road, squeezed between Alexis Park and twin oil tanks.
Was it,
No, before that, there was just big bushes, mostly like bushes like this here around there, and stuff like that there. Back then, I thought it was just a playground. They dig up oil and throw it at somebody and this and that there. It was fun. I was a kid.
He says when he was young, he and the other kids of Wilbank Street would play in the sludge pits and oil slicks of an area that was called, by the standards of the time, clean.
Like oil slick, like slick, like if you did a road, in your black toy, that would have looked like the rocks and then different things like that. Before they tried to recover it up with dirt and stuff like that. But,
There are studies underway now which may tell us just how clean the company left this site in 1966.
So we remedied that situation by going around it and let it play and having a good time.
Do you feel like when you were a kid that you were playing in something that you shouldn't have been playing in? I mean, looking back at it.
Looking back at it now, I want my kid to go through it. I want to have him out there for nothing.
How clean was it?
Out there playing and stuff because I didn't know better. And things in education weren't that great. But as of now, I know better and I regret it.
So far, no one has asked James Smith. After the Alexis Park incident, a preliminary study found no unreasonable health risks, and people went home. Monitoring is being done right now at the apartment complex and all around the area for any health threats. In an agreement reached between Oxy and the state DEQ in 1991, Oxy will pay for a comprehensive study of the refinery site. The agreement prescribes that Oxy will uncover potential hazards in the area. This is one of the first steps in understanding exactly what trouble there may be. The study would be an important roadmap for planning any remediation that may be necessary should contaminants be found at health-threatening levels. It will include evaluations of the deep soil, soil gas, surface soil, groundwater, and surface water runoff.
It'll take us a little while to go through it and review it. We'll make that document available to the public, just as we've done every document we've gotten thus far, so that they can look at it, or they can get anyone they want to look at it. And then we'll, we plan to have a final meeting where we just, decide what is to be done and let everyone know what the study has shown overall. That will include the results of the soil gas, of the indoor air sampling, what is in their homes.
This is the only area of law enforcement where the guilty party, the criminal, the polluter, is being asked to decide the remedy.
Alan Canner is cynical. He says his 20 years of environmental and toxic waste trials have left him with the feeling that whoever controls the first step sets the terms for the rest of the debate.
I think when I started in this business, I did trust them. I really didn't think that people were out to hurt anybody needlessly. And while people still say this, when you think about the millions of dollars to clean up a piece of property, tens of millions of dollars to clean it up, they've got an economic incentive. They can't deny they got an economic incentive to do it slowly and maybe not find it all. Okay? They're just saying, please believe us, we're good corporate citizens, we really care. I wish that I saw more cleanups move more quickly.
They are implementing a plan that we approved, and built into that plan is quality control on our part, where we have overseen, we have had a person on site overseeing sampling almost all the time.
One of the things that always strikes me wrong about Louisiana is that the exact same company in New York State or New Jersey or Pennsylvania, funny how where the state's really pushing them, they manage to get the job done maybe in 3 or 4 years. Louisiana always seems to take longer.
It seems like it's been, what, almost 10 years now. If you don't have answers for people, do you think that people get suspicious at some point if you don't have an answer for them immediately?
I don't think so. I think most people realize that, that it's not, if you come up with quick answers, they might get suspicious.
Yet residents like Auburn Sanders have waited 10 years for an answer. The first study told them there was no danger. What if the Oxy study says the same thing?
The EQ says open your windows. Open your windows or go somewhere. I mean, it was storming the other day and my house was full of the odor and it was so hot. They said, open my windows.
If the number of participants at recent public meetings are any indicator, most people are satisfied something is being done.
The cases that we have investigated, we don't have any concerns. We don't think there is any health or safety problem in those areas.
Both Oxy and the DEQ assure us that the results of their joint study will be published by the end of this year. We'll keep you posted. And on a related note, Kai Midboe, the State Secretary of DEQ, will be joining us next week on the program to talk about changes at his agency and about his future with the agency. Also, next week, we expect the State Casino Board will be choosing an operator for Louisiana's single casino in New Orleans. That board will be meeting going up. Construction and expansion in the healthcare field is at a new high. And later in the program, R.C. Chapa will continue our series of reports looking into the reasons for the boom. Also tonight, Department of Environmental Quality Secretary Kai Midboe will be here, and we'll talk about his tenure at that agency. He recently announced that he would like to leave his position. Tonight, we'll discuss that as well as several other environmental issues. We are shifting gears from the casino, but no less dicey a proposition in Louisiana is the environment. Let me start off by asking you about something which in our last 2 programs, Jeff Dewey has been reporting on, which is what is called by some people in the Bossier City area the Alexis Park problem. Right. One of the things that stands out from the series that Jeff did was that some people up there not only are concerned about the problem, but they're complaining about the fact that they have been asking for 10 years, when is somebody going to do something?
Yeah, it's a very serious problem, and we're very concerned about it. It is one of many inactive and abandoned waste sites we have here in Louisiana that we're going to have to be dealing with. The problem with this site, which makes it unique, is that it is a developed area. And how do we go about dealing with the area? We have been responding by doing an extensive amount of testing up there. I think we're going to be taking more than 1,000 samples on this 215-acre site, trying to determine what is the extent of contamination and how serious is it and what our concerns are. And then we're going to move into the remediation stage.
Well, let me stop you for a second.
Yeah.
How long does the testing go on?
The testing should be over fairly soon. And as a matter of fact, I think the reports are supposed to be back by December sometime. One of the things I am concerned about, though, is that as this information starts coming in, that the citizens be in a position to understand what all this testing means, particularly as we go into the next stage where we're going to actually be doing remediation. So what I have done is I have formed a citizens advisory group composed of people who actually live on the site or have businesses on the site. And I'm in the process, as a matter of fact, next week we should be sending out a request for proposals of hiring a technical advisor whose sole job will be to advise the local citizens as to what all this data means. We will pay for him, but it will be a person who will respond solely to them on what all this information is.
Based on the fact that the problem has been complained about for 10 years, and based upon the fact that y'all have been doing some testing, are there people in danger up there?
No, people aren't in danger because we are monitoring. We're monitoring for methane gas, which is one of the major concerns. We're monitoring for lead contamination. As a matter of fact, we closed down a playground up at the site because we were very concerned about there being an excess level of lead. It was borderline, but we preferred to be on the cautionary side. But no, we are testing, we're monitoring, and we're keeping a close eye on the site.
All right, well, let's assume that the testing does turn up something that does need to be fixed or remediated, as you said. What's your best projection at this point about how long it'll take to fix the problem?
Yeah, that's going to be the question of what we discover and what types of things we have to do. The problem that we're concerned about is the fact that this is an urbanized area. And how do you go about remediating a site that has hotels, apartment complexes, homes, and so forth on it? It's going to require a lot of ingenuity, to be honest with you.
Let me shift gears from that particular problem to something that was in the paper in the last week, and that is that in Louisiana, auto emissions testing is on the horizon. And a lot of people saw the picture of you getting your car tested.
My infamous vehicle.
Your infamous attempt to pass the test or demonstrate how easy it was to pass, and you flunked.
Well, no, we weren't demonstrating how easy it was to pass. We were trying to
stand corrected.
What this was a proposal for the technology, and we put my vehicle through it. It passed when it ran through on ordinary gasoline, but it failed for some reason on natural gas, which really concerns me. So we're taking the vehicle back to the person who installed the natural gas system in it, and we're going to have it tested to make sure that it was installed properly.
Shouldn't it have gotten a better grade?
Should have gotten a much better grade. So we're actively promoting conversion of vehicles to natural gas. So I'm very anxious to find out why it failed.
Okay, I'm sure you'll report back to us on that.
Absolutely.
Okay. But may not invite the cameras when you go to check the car. You have told the governor that you are looking to ease out of being head of DEQ. Why?
Well, my basic problem is I have 2 children. They're both approaching college age, and I've spent virtually my entire life in government, and I have no savings. I need to start looking at trying to earn additional income to put them through college. That's the only reason I'm planning to go back into the private sector. I love government. I love what I'm doing. Governor Edwards has been very, very supportive of me. I have absolutely no complaints over the treatment I've received as secretary. It's strictly a financial decision.
Did you have those 2 children when you took this job?
Yeah, and I thought I could do it. My income fell by about half from private practice, and I thought I could do it, but my wife and I just sat down and looked at the budget, and we realized we can't.
Okay. So far in the year and a half that you've been in place as head of DEQ, what's been the biggest success that you would point to?
We have had a lot of successes. I think probably several things. One is keeping the agency open, actually expanding the openness of it. We've created the Governor's Task Force on Environmental Quality, which brings everybody around the table to try and work on issues. We have leading environmentalists, leading industrial representatives, people from business, ordinary citizens. We sit down around the table on a monthly basis and try to deal with these issues. We've created...
You disarm everyone before they enter the room.
No. They get lively at times, but it's fun. Everybody comes to the table with a really constructive approach, and I'm very proud of that.
What's been your biggest disappointment?
I think probably the biggest disappointment has been trying to resolve some of the things we're talking about today, some of the inactive and abandoned waste sites that we have in the state. We have already identified over 500 sites that we're going to have to be looking at for remediation. These sites run millions and millions of dollars to try and deal with. We only have a $4 million trust fund to do it. That trust fund took a budget cut because it's one of the few general funds we actually get in the department. So that's probably one of my most frustrating things in trying to deal with.
I understand you set up recently a committee or a commission on environmental racism?
Right. That's an issue that we're very concerned about. I'm not sure, and again, this is what we're going to look into, but I'm not sure that plants have been locating along the Mississippi River corridor with a racial motivation. But that doesn't mean that there's not a disproportionate impact being felt by the minority community. Minorities in Louisiana tend to be disproportionately represented in the poorer sectors of our economy. And what's happening is these companies are locating where they can buy land cheaply, next to the Mississippi River and so forth. So there tends to be a disproportionate impact, and we want to take a good, careful look at that.
What is the charge that's been given the commission?
Well, it's to look at it. I mean, to come up with what is the problem and then hopefully recommend some solutions. So.
And if you are head of DEQ, what will you do with those recommendations?
Well, we'll try to implement them, obviously. I mean, that's the whole reason behind trying to look into the issue.
Okay. Now, obviously, you think something is there.
Well, I think there's a real basis for concern, and no, we're going to look into it.
That relates to the raging dispute over the phrase cancer alley. I don't think I could conduct an interview with you and not raise that point.
Well, I have to defer to the Louisiana Tumor Registry, and they, we're one of the few states in the nation that actually takes into account or traces incidences of cancer and have a fairly good handle on where they're coming from and what their causes are. They have looked at the incident level or rate of cancer and have come to the conclusion that we are actually at or below the exposure or incidence rate as a state compared to the rest of the nation. What we do have is a higher mortality rate, which means although your chances of getting exposed are the same or less than the rest of the nation, once you are exposed, your chances of developing cancer, or I should say dying from cancer, are greater than the rest of the nation. So the question we have to ask is it an exposure issue or is it a health care issue? If it's a health care issue, we need to be focusing on early detection, getting early, operative or whatever you want to call it, or early treatment, of the cancer.
So I take it that you do believe there is something there that needs to be explored.
Yeah, I think very much so in the health area. And as a matter of fact, we're working very closely with Dr. Larry Hebert over in public health on that issue.
Okay. One quick question. You ran for Attorney General a couple of years ago. Politics in your future?
No, I've had Republicans approach me, and I've said, well, you have to be prepared to run a newly divorced candidate. My wife will leave me in a second if I decide to run again.
Well, we'll leave it right there and hope that that doesn't occur. Kai Midboe, Secretary of DEQ, thanks for being with us.
Appreciate it.
Okay. On another environmental issue, we need to make a clarification about last week's story concerning Bossier City. We'd made a reference last week to an abandoned refinery as being owned by Citgo. In fact, we're now advised that the last operator of that location was Arkansas Fuel Oil Company.